to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. For our text today, we look at 1 Kings chapter 14. At that time, Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, fell sick. And Jeroboam said to his wife, "Arise, and disguise yourself, that it not be known that you are the wife of Jeroboam, and go to Shiloh. Behold, Ahijah the prophet is there, who said of me that I should be king over this people. Take with you 10 loaves, some cakes, and a jar of honey, and go to him. He will tell you what shall happen to the child." Jeroboam's wife did so. She arose and went to Shiloh and came to the house of Ahijah. Now Ahijah could not see, for his eyes were dim because of his age. And Yahweh said to Ahijah, "Behold, the wife of Jeroboam is coming to inquire of you concerning her son, for he is sick. Thus and thus shall you say to her." When she came, she pretended to be another woman. But when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet as she came in at the door, he said, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why do you pretend to be another? For I am charged with unbearable news for you. Go, tell Jeroboam, thus says Yahweh the God of Israel, because I exalted you from among the people and made you leader over my people Israel, and tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. And yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me with all his heart, doing only that which was right in my eyes. But you have done evil above all who were before you, and have gone and made for yourself other gods and metal images, provoking me to anger, and have cast me behind your back. Therefore, behold, I will bring harm upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male, both bond and free, in Israel, and will burn up the house of Jeroboam as a man burns up dung until it is gone. Anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the city the dogs shall eat, and anyone who dies in the open country the birds of the heavens shall eat, for Yahweh has spoken it. Arise, therefore, go to your house. When your feet enter the city, the child shall die. And all Israel shall mourn for him, and bury him. For he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave, because in him there is found something pleasing to Yahweh, the God of Israel, in the house of Jeroboam. Moreover, Yahweh will raise up for himself a king over Israel, who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam today. And henceforth Yahweh will strike Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and root up Israel out of this good land that he gave to their fathers, and scatter them beyond the Euphrates, because they have made their Asherim, provoking Yahweh to anger. And he will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned and made Israel to sin." Then Jeroboam's wife arose and departed and came to Tirzah. And as she came to the threshold of the house, the child died. And all Israel buried him and mourned for him according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke by his servant Ahijah the prophet. Now the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he warred and how he reigned, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. And the time that Jeroboam reigned was 22 years. And he slept with his fathers, and Nadab his son reigned in his place. Now Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city that Yahweh had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite. And Judah did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all that their fathers had done. For they also built for themselves high places and pillars and Asherim on every high hill and under every green tree, and there were also male cult prostitutes in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations that Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of Yahweh and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away all the shields of gold that Solomon had made, and King Rehoboam made in their place shields of bronze, and committed them to the hands of the officers of the guard who kept the door of the king's house. And as often as the king went into the house of Yahweh, the guard carried them and brought them back to the guard room. Now the rest of the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. And Rehoboam slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite. And Abijam his son reigned in his place. This is the word of the Lord. So our text today, we see at the start of it that Jeroboam, this wicked king who has set up the pagan worship sites in Bethel and Dan and abandoned Yahweh, his son has fallen sick. Where does Jeroboam turn seeking help for his son? It's a question you can talk about with your children. In theory, you would expect him to turn to his false gods, but he doesn't. He turns to Yahweh. He goes to the prophet, the one who had appointed him to be king over this people. He's afraid to go himself, and so he sends his wife, and he won't even send her dressed as her normal self. He has her disguise herself to be pretending to be someone she isn't. You can talk to your kids about that as well. Why the disguise? Who is it that Jeroboam is trying to fool here? Is it that he's trying to fool the prophet, thinking that Ahijah won't respond favorably if he knows it's Jeroboam's family, because Jeroboam has rejected God? Or is he trying to fool his own kingdom, so that they don't see, as he's got them worshiping the false gods he's made, so that they don't see that he's turning to a different god for help? The text does not tell us, but it's something to consider. Now, as she goes, she's going to go to Shiloh. Shiloh is just a little north of Bethel. It is a major city in the history of God's people, because from the time of Joshua, so around 1400 BC, a little after, until the time of the prophet Samuel, which is in the, I guess technically the 10th century BC, in the 1000s, this is the house of the Lord. Shiloh is host to the tabernacle, to the Ark of the Covenant, which is the throne of God. Over 300 years, probably about 350 years, that the tabernacle rested in Shiloh, until David brought it to Jerusalem at a later point. It does get moved from there first, but David will eventually bring it to Jerusalem, and now under Solomon we have the temple that has replaced the tabernacle. So she does what she's been instructed to do. She puts on the disguise and she goes. But Ahijah, well, we learn a detail about him that tells us it wouldn't have mattered in the first place. Ahijah can't see. He's blind in his old age. So, well, or at least close to blind. His eyes are dim. His vision is failing him. And so as she goes to him, he wouldn't have noticed her anyway. Not likely, at least. But Yahweh speaks to him and informs him of what's to pass, that she is coming, and this is what he shall say to her. We don't actually get those words. Notice, thus and thus you shall say to her. That's quite a way to summarize the words of the Lord there, as the writer of the Kings puts it down for us. Now, the note here in verse 5 is you cannot hide from God. No matter how hard you try, you can't. And that is both law and it's gospel. This you might be able to unpack with your kids. Why would it be a bad thing that you can't hide from God? Why might it be a good thing that you can't hide from God? So the bad part is, the use of the law, it's the wicked. The wicked who would seek to hide their evil ways from God and get away with doing what they want when they want, and they can't. God's judgment will find them on the judgment day. He knows what they have done in the darkness. However, for God's people, this text is gospel. That you cannot hide from God is a wondrous blessing, gift, It's a comfort. It's the words of Jesus himself at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. We are never alone. The Lord does not forsake his people. We are his, and he is with us. That's such a comfort to the Christian. So law and gospel, this idea that God cannot be hidden from. Verse 6, Ahijah reveals her secret. He knows who she is, and says that he has unbearable news. So not good news, terrible news for her. He gives us here what Yahweh has said. Because I exalted you, I made you leader over my people. I tore away the kingdom from the house of David. I gave it to you. Notice the actions. Who's doing the actions? Yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments. You have done evil above all who were before you, and have made for yourself other gods. So you see God's actions, and you see the contrast to Jeroboam's actions. Jeroboam has brought harm upon himself and upon the people of God. God speaks that judgment. I will bring harm upon the house of Jeroboam. I will cut off from Jeroboam every male. So God is going to put an end to Jeroboam's family tree, is the reference there. The message Ahijah delivers to the mother, to the wife: when your feet enter the city, the child shall die. Those would be words to cause grief to any mother. We don't know really much of anything about this woman. We don't know if she was faithful to God or not. Most likely she's not, but we don't know that. She is then told that only this child will avoid a worse fate, that all the other descendants of Jeroboam will either be destroyed out in the field, out in the country, or right there in the streets of the city, and they will be consumed by the animals of the earth or the birds of the heavens. Only this child will get to sleep in a sense, sleep in peace. He will get to rest. He will be buried. He will be mourned. The rest of the house will not. Instead, God is going to strike Israel. He's going to root Israel up. So this is a picture you can do with your kids. God has planted Israel in the promised land. So you think of a plant that you have planted. God is now going to root them up. He's going to rip them out of the ground. He's going to rip them out of the promised land, and he's going to scatter them. So if you have a plant that you planted last year as a family, or if you happen to listen to this during the fall, it's springtime right now, but if you listen in the fall, this works too. If you've got a plant that you have planted, your children have planted, it's even better, and you have them rip it out of the ground and just throw it out into the rest of the yard, gone. That's the picture here. God has ripped his people out of the promised land, or he will, and he will scatter them to the edge of the earth. And that's going to be the work of the Assyrians beyond the Euphrates that will come and destroy Israel, the northern kingdom, in 722 BC. Well, 725 they start. It's the siege lasts for a while. And God gives the reason: because they have made their Asherim, which is a reference to the goddess Ashtaroth and her pagan worship. He will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam. Those sins of Jeroboam are going to be mentioned about every king of Israel, the northern kingdom, until that destruction of Assyria comes. So we'll keep our eye on that. We learn that Jeroboam reigned for 22 years, so he outlasts Rehoboam, who we learn in the next verse 21 there, reigned 17 years. So 5 years longer. His son Nadab takes over for him. And then we shift and we go back to Judah. We'll bounce back and forth a lot between the two nations here in the book. So we see Rehoboam really didn't do any better, did he? After his unwise reaction to the people that lost him most of his kingdom, most of his father's kingdom. Which, by the way, I'd missed that note. Solomon, Rehoboam's father, in the book of Ecclesiastes that he wrote, includes a conversation about enjoying what you have now, because who knows what the person who comes after you will do with it, if he will be wise or a fool. And so Solomon, in all of his great wisdom that he had, and he blows it, but he himself leaves everything to Rehoboam, who is a fool and loses most of it within just a couple of months. It's a sad picture, really, but a note that should not be missed in a discussion around that book of 1 Kings chapter 12. Now, we see in verse 22, Judah did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. They provoked him to jealousy, more than all their fathers had done. So just as Jeroboam is said to have been worse, now we see that here as well. And so what have they done? Well, they built for themselves high places and pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. So they've built these pagan worship sites all over the place. And it's all over the place, under every green tree. They're everywhere. I remember as a kid growing up, one of the jokes, because Walgreens were popping up all over the place, was there's going to be a Walgreens on every corner by 2020. Now, we're past 2020. That did not come to fruition. But that's the picture here, that these things are popping up everywhere. Everywhere you look, you run into one of these high places that they've built for worshiping a false god. And then verse 24, they also have male cult prostitutes. Now, pausing on that one, that's a little more advanced than what most of the ancient world did at that time. Female cult prostitutes were fairly common among some of the pagan religions. Essentially, the idea being that if you wanted your land to be fertile, you needed to convince the gods to bless the earth with fertility, and the way you did that was you went into a temple prostitute. That they also have male temple prostitutes could mean one of two things. The female temple prostitutes aren't any good either. That's a bad thing too. But this male one means, again, one of two things. It's either the idea that then the men in their pagan worship are now committing homosexual acts as well, or that these men are sending their own wives to these prostitutes. It could be either or, maybe it's both. But the idea, again, of the temple prostitute is to increase fertility in the land, although that, as we know, as Christians, as followers of the true God and King of the universe, that's not how it works. So they did according to all the abominations of the nations that Yahweh drove out before his people. Instead of destroying the pagan worship sites, instead of removing all of these false gods and all these pagan practices from the land and worshiping only Yahweh alone, they've done the opposite. They have engrossed themselves in the abominations, and they have abandoned Yahweh. Verse 25, Shishak, king of Egypt, comes up to fight against Jerusalem. So much for that alliance that Father Solomon had made. Rehoboam doesn't get to see the fruits of that. Instead, we don't even see a battle here, right? Nothing. Shishak, the king of Egypt, just comes and plunders. He takes all the gold. Took the treasures of the house of Yahweh, so he robs the temple. He takes the treasures out of the king's house. He takes away everything. And Rehoboam just replaces it with bronze material. So the gold shields replaced with bronze shields, which are nowhere near the value that the golden shields had been. So it's interesting to note that there's no fight here, that Rehoboam does not bother to fight on behalf of the temple. The New Testament theology we have is that you wouldn't battle over something like this. But in the Old Testament culture, as the nation of God, you would have expected a fight here, and there isn't one. There's nothing. We do get the note about where they are fighting, though, in verse 30. War between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. That's something we'll see a lot of as we go through the book of Kings together. It's a hatred and a rivalry that continues clear into the New Testament, where in the New Testament, it's the northern kingdom is represented by the Samaritans, the southern kingdom represented by the Jews, and they don't get along. You see that, for example, in John chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman that Jesus talks to at the well. She wonders why a Jew like him would talk to her at all. A couple of notes, the verse 19's Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and verse 29's Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. It is possible that that's a reference to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, but not necessarily. Probably not. Lots of books are referenced in the Old Testament, especially in Kings and Chronicles too. Lots of books are going to be referenced that we just don't have. So we know that they had other things to document their history with. The last note to mention to your kids is something we're going to track together through the week ahead, next couple weeks. Track the good kings and the bad kings. The Bible will very clearly label them for us if they were good in the eyes of the Lord or wicked. Track them for both Israel and Judah. I've never actually tabulated this, so it'll be interesting to kind of keep track here and see what it ends up being.